Do you want to achieve a more artistic and professional finish in your watercolors? In this video, you will discover the uses you can give to the dry brush. This is one of the most used techniques by the top artists in watercolor to create textures and represent specific landscape elements. Take a good look at this shadow that's projected on the ground. At the beginning, its contour line is harder, meaning it's more defined, and as the shadow moves away, this line becomes more and more blurred. And this is done in a progressive way. What speed? The one that just passed by here is Shira. By the way, take the opportunity to subscribe now so you won't miss any interesting content in my upcoming videos. In this watercolor, you can see a great example of what we're talking about. We'll start this shadow of vegetation that extends to the left with a strong mark, and as it moves away, we'll apply the dry brush technique to create this roughness that produces the blurry effect and broken line, which adds interest and aesthetic sense to the artwork. Here, all the shadows on the ground, notice how they alternate. For example, here is the shadow super defined, and as it moves away, you can see this really interesting stroke from the dry brush. In this area too, do you see? Dry brush even splashes. Do you see this line of the palm tree? Also super interesting, broken here at the end. Do you also see these shadows of the people projected on the ground with dry brush strokes? And look, in some strokes, for example, of the people, we also have dry brush. Do you see here on the legs of this individual too as well? And we also have an example in the vegetation. For example, these strokes here of the palm leaves are done with the dry brush technique. These also create a very interesting texture and stroke. And as you can see, it's combined with other strokes here that are done wet. Now look at the typical glimmers that the sun produces on the sea. They are so powerful that to represent them, we will always use the white of the paper. And we're going to take advantage of its texture, in case we have a rough paper to enhance this effect. We will always create these glimmers using this specific technique, the dry brush. Be careful, don't use any other technique for this. Another use we can give to this technique is for a distant sea, to mark some waves, small swells, and little glimmers on the water. Another use, for example, we can apply it to some casual white clouds like those that pass through the sky. Totally white, and to mark some harder edges, we can use the dry brush technique, and you can see it in this other watercolor. It would also be the same case. Well, in this piece, we can see another example of how to use the dry brush technique, for instance, in vegetation and trees. Over here in these trees. In these, everything is dry brush, and here the texture is used to the fullest, as you can see. And on this tree, from here, it gives us some very interesting textures. For example, this finish and this one here. Another great application of this would be, for example, on small elements like we've seen before, also on people. So here, for example, on windows, both in the actual ones and in their reflection. In these here, you can see this brush stroke even more expressive, super expressive. And well, as you already know, we can also use it for textures in general. You can notice it here in this area. A lot of the roughness effect, and since we're on this watercolor as an extra, I also want to mention the contrast between dry brush strokes and then over here, wet and blended finishes. Here's another example. For lights of a distant city, in a sunset or nightfall context, you can see. Over here, it'd be the same, and then this are some highlights. We can also give texture to the grass. And over here, we've also added texture to the grass. Over here too, do you see? This brush stroke, this line. Another example of applying this texture to a small element, like this trail left by the boat in the sea. Here, in this watercolor, we see, for example, a use of this technique in the background texture. Just so you know, this dog is the only dog I've painted in watercolor. It's a special case. And finally, you can see in this landscape, so here you can also see an example of using it in the texture of the grass to add highlights and interest. To make everything clear for you, and in case it helps, I'm leaving a summary on the screen. Of all the cases I've been mentioning where we can use this technique, you can take a screenshot or write it down on a piece of paper if you prefer. Alright, let's do a little bit more practice. Let's get to work. For the test, I'm specifically going to use this Da Vinci Petite Gris No. 3 brush. I'm going to do an example now with the highlights of the sea. This would be the sky. Let's now mark the edge of the sea. I want to mark a line that's a bit more defined. I'm going to control the moisture if you want. Well, you can try it on a... I have it right to test the moisture. On another paper, okay. And the highlight, well, it has to be central, okay? Don't put highlights here and others scattered around. That's usually the issue. I'll start here. It's fine for me, or I can do it a bit more towards the center. Okay. Towards the center. Okay. And here. Be careful, I'm going to do more. Controlling the spot. I'm taking more paint. I'm telling you, you need to practice this. And now we're going to do the other side. Let's get in. I'm running out of paint. See. You can adjust it a little bit, adding more tone. Okay, but make sure we keep it more or less in a straight line. These highlights also depend on the angle. Well, we could also do them from the bottom, more closed. For example, too much humidity. And here they are closing in. They are fading away. Another quick example. Now, for example, I could adjust some things. I'm to take a little off here of tone so that the highlight looks more focused. And then up here we would do the sky. So expressive. Now we have a sky like this. It's a little wet here, but it's no big deal. We can cut it with the handkerchief. The handkerchief also has its particular uses. One day I have to make a video about the handkerchief too. Well, now we have another mini landscape. Let's make a tree now. Mine colors, in case you have doubts and don't know yet, I use the Daniel Smith brand. Let's make some interesting strokes like this. Do you see wrist turns? We're making pieces that we can connect, leaving blank spaces. Now I'm not looking at myself much, but we can moisten. And inside the tree I'm adding its dark areas while it's wet. And we're correcting strokes. Some can be more branches. Well, here I would switch brushes. I could do it with the big one too, but let's do it right. And look, dry brush also on the trunk. as you already know, I always say adding interest to the branches is important. And working in various directions. Well, I try to make quick examples, and I always keep entertained. Then we can come in here when it dries, add some branches among the foliage. Some branches that can also be seen here among the foliage. Look, and since I see that our tree is definitely lacking a more suitable composition, I'm absolutely going to insist on it. And it's missing something over here. You see, it turned out this, we're missing a bit of the crown over here. Well, this is an example of a somewhat elaborate tree, if later we want to make a smaller, more distant one faster. Well, the same idea, but in a small way. Let's say a bit of shape. And there you go, example. An artistic shape. We change the brush. And there we have it. Then we can make these like the ones you saw before. Sometimes we can start with a flatter brush. Here we make it thicker, for example. And here with a dry brush that we can slightly control a bit. And it sticks out a bit here. We already have it. Well, now instead of trees, we have vegetation. So there's a bit of vegetation in this area. And this might connect for us over here with a bit of grass. And with something darker, we can connect it here. And finally, we could finish with the example of the shadow. So as I told you, we start with a more defined shadow. And bam, we create the texture. Then, obviously, we would connect this shadow better with the tree. And this. It would be the same. Here it's getting to me. Here, it was a bit more defined. Well, I take more color. Maybe, well, this shadow would be a bit different because then here there would be, well, the foliage, the shadow of the foliage. But to show you the idea of the stroke, it's just about making this gesture. Look, hey, today I'm not convinced by my trees. This, I really like this one, but not this one. That's it. How would we fix this here? Well, now, we could darken a little bit of the area at the bottom and tape. Tree fixed. Look at one thing. I didn't do it on purpose, but just to show you that sometimes with practice we discover little things here too. I hadn't really thought about it, but it came out where the sunlight would be coming from, which would be from the right. Well, the right side of the tree has turned out like this, with a bit of the dry brush texture as if it were the sunlight coming in from here in the shadow. Well, it has turned out, hey, spot on. Well, if you want to master this technique from the ground up, the first step to achieve that is to go watch this video I'm leaving you here, because in it, I teach you how to make the gestures properly. In addition to controlling the moisture load of the brush, there are other factors that can also influence, of course, like the speed of the stroke. But come on, Shira, do you think it's normal that you have to run through here while I'm recording a video?